The dust and desperation clung to Lillian Forester's skin like a second layer as she fled through the darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs with each step that carried her away from the place she'd called home for 7 miserable years. Blood trickled from her split lip, the metallic taste a stark reminder of Oliver Whitman's farewell, a backhand that had nearly knocked her unconscious. But not this time. This time she'd managed to stay on her feet, to grab the small bundle she'd hidden beneath the porch, and to run while he lay in a drunken stupor. Montana Territory, 1876. The night wrapped around her like a cloak as Lillian stumbled toward the silhouette of Cody, a small but growing settlement nestled between rolling plains and distant mountains. The town's few lanterns twinkled like stars fallen to earth, promising something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, clutching the worn leather satchel containing all she owned: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, and $17 saved penny by penny over years of secret hoarding. At 24, Lillian was embarking on a journey that would brand her an outcast, a sinner, a woman who dared leave the sacred bonds of matrimony. But she'd rather be unholy than dead, which is precisely what she would be if she stayed one more night under Oliver's roof. Dawn was breaking as she reached the town's edge, its golden fingers stretching across the dusty main street. Lillian tucked her bruised face deeper into her shawl. Her body ached from the beating and the 4-mile walk, but there was no time for rest. She needed work and shelter before Oliver discovered her absence and came looking. The Cattleman's Hotel stood at the far end of the street, its weathered sign promising rooms for respectable folk. Lillian almost laughed at the irony. She was no longer respectable by society's standards. The moment she'd fled her husband's house, she'd become something else entirely. "We don't hire women without references," the hotel manager said, eyeing her suspiciously. "Especially ones who look like they've been in a fight." "Please," Lillian said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I can clean, cook, sew, anything you need." "Got all that covered," he replied coldly. "Move along." 3 more businesses turned her away. By midday, Lillian's hope had begun to wither under the harsh Montana sun. She sat on a bench outside the general store, her bundle beside her, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Freedom meant little if she starved to death. "You look like you could use this." Lillian startled at the deep voice. A man stood before her, holding out a tin cup of water. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he waited patiently for her to accept his offering. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dust-covered black hat that had seen better days. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the cup with trembling hands. "Name's Knox O'Malley," he said, settling beside her but leaving a respectful distance between them. "Just rode in with a herd from the south. You waiting on someone?" Lillian hesitated. Every instinct warned her to be wary of strange men, yet something about his direct gaze felt honest. "No," she said finally. "I'm looking for work." Knox studied her face, his eyes lingering momentarily on her swollen lip before tactfully shifting away. "Happen to hear Mrs. Sullivan at the Silver Spur is short-handed. Her cook left yesterday, headed to California with gold fever. She might be hiring." "The Silver Spur?" Lillian questioned. A flash of amusement crossed Knox's weathered face. "It's a saloon, but decent as they come in these parts. Mrs. Sullivan runs a tight ship, doesn't tolerate any rough business toward her girls." Lillian's cheeks flushed. "I'm not that kind of for cooking," Knox interrupted gently. "Though I reckon Mrs. Sullivan wouldn't care much what you were before, so long as you can make a decent meal now." She studied him, searching for deception. "Why are you helping me?" Knox stood, adjusting his hat. "Let's just say I recognize the look of someone who needs a fresh start." He gestured down the street. "Silver Spurs, the two-story building with the blue door. Tell Margaret that Knox sent you. She owes me a favor." Before Lillian could thank him properly, he tipped his hat and strode away, spurs jingling with each step. The Silver Spur was cleaner than Lillian expected, with polished floors and windows that actually let in light. Margaret Sullivan, a stout woman with iron-gray hair and shrewd eyes, evaluated Lillian from behind a long wooden bar. "Knox O'Malley sent you, did he?" Margaret's tone was neutral, but her gaze was sharp, taking in Lillian's bruised face and shabby dress. "Yes, madam. I'm looking for work." "I can cook, can you now? And what's your name?" "Lillian Forester," she replied, deciding in that moment to reclaim her maiden name. "Married," Lillian's throat tightened. "Widowed," she lied. Margaret's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "What can you cook besides the usual?" "My mother taught me everything from stews to pies. I can make bread that stays soft for days, and my chicken dumplings were the talk of our church suppers back home in Missouri." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "Kitchen's in the back. Room upstairs comes with the job, small but private. $5 a week plus room and board. We serve meals from noon to midnight, Sundays off." "I accept," Lillian said quickly before the woman could change her mind. "Good. You can start tomorrow." But Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Just so we understand each other, I don't tolerate liars in my establishment." Lillian stiffened. "That bruise on your face isn't from grief, Mrs. Forester. I don't need to know the truth, but don't insult my intelligence." Shame and relief warred within Lillian. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry, be careful. This town has all kinds, and not all of them are as understanding as I am." Margaret gestured toward the stairs. "Room 7. Get some rest. You look dead on your feet." The room was indeed small, with just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a three-legged stool, but it had a lock on the door and a window that overlooked the back alley. Lillian sank onto the thin mattress and allowed herself, finally, to weep, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she was free. For 3 weeks, Lillian settled into her new life. Her cooking quickly became popular among the miners, cowboys, and townspeople who frequented the Silver Spur. Her days were long and tiring, but for the first time, the aches in her body came from honest work rather than abuse. Knox O'Malley became a regular customer, though he never stayed long and rarely spoke to her directly. He would nod in greeting, eat his meal, always leaving a generous tip, and depart with a courteous tip of his hat. Lillian found herself watching for him, curious about the taciturn cowboy who had extended kindness to a stranger. It was Margaret who finally satisfied some of her curiosity. "That man's got quite a story," Margaret said one evening as they watched Knox leave. "Came to Montana 5 years ago with nothing but his horse and saddle. Now he's foreman at the Triple Crown Ranch, 15 miles west of town. Owner's an Easterner who barely visits, leaves Knox to run everything. He seems reserved," Lillian observed. Margaret chuckled. "Knox O'Malley's words are like gold pieces. He doesn't spend them frivolously, but when he does speak, people listen." She gave Lillian a sidelong glance. "He seems to have taken an interest in your welfare." "He was just being kind," Lillian protested, busying herself with wiping down the counter. "Knox isn't just anything, my dear. If he's watching out for you, there's a reason." Before Lillian could respond, the saloon's doors burst open. The sudden silence that fell over the room made her look up. Oliver Whitman stood in the doorway, his bloodshot eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Lillian's blood turned to ice. "There you are, you whore," Oliver snarled, staggering forward. "Did you think I wouldn't find you?" Lillian froze, her fingers clutching the counter's edge as her husband advanced. 4 weeks of healing crumbled in an instant, leaving her paralyzed with familiar terror. "This is my establishment." Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. "State your business or leave." "My business," Oliver spat, "is my wife. I've come to take her home." Whispers erupted around the room. Lillian could feel the judgment in their eyes, could almost hear their thoughts. A woman who abandoned her husband, unnatural, unholy. "Is this true?" Margaret turned to Lillian. "Is he your husband?" Lillian's mouth went dry, but she managed to nod. Margaret's expression hardened. "I don't employ married women without their husband's consent. It's against my principles." "Mrs. Sullivan, please," Lillian began, but Oliver cut her off with a vicious grip on her arm. "You've had your adventure," he hissed. "Time to come home." "Let go of me," Lillian whispered, struggling against his iron grip. "Or what?" Oliver sneered. "You're my wife. I can do whatever I want with you, and there's not a soul in this room who'd say different." "I would." The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. Knox O'Malley stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the fading daylight. He stepped inside, spurs jingling against the wooden floor as he approached. Lillian hadn't even noticed him returning. Oliver's grip tightened. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy. This is between a man and his wife." Knox moved with deliberate calm, positioning himself between Oliver and the exit. "The lady doesn't seem eager to go with you. That makes it my concern." "She's my property," Oliver snapped. "The law's on my side." "Perhaps," Knox acknowledged, his voice level. "But I'm standing right here, and I say you'll release her arm before I break yours." The saloon had gone utterly silent. Even the piano player had stopped mid-song, his fingers hovering above the keys. Oliver finally released Lillian, but his face contorted with rage. "You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Knox replied, his eyes cold as Montana winter. "A man who beats women isn't a man at all." Oliver lunged forward, but Knox sidestepped smoothly. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Oliver's outstretched arm and twisted, forcing the smaller man to his knees with a howl of pain. "Here's how this will go," Knox said calmly, as though discussing the weather. "You're going to leave this establishment. You're going to leave Cody. And you're never going to bother Mrs. Forester again. She's my wife." Oliver gasped through his pain. "Then I suggest you find yourself a new one, because this one's finished with you." Knox increased the pressure slightly. "Do we understand each other?" After a moment of resistance, Oliver nodded. Knox released him and stepped back, watching as Oliver scrambled to his feet. "This isn't over," Oliver threatened, backing toward the door. "She's my lawful wife. They'll hunt her down as a deserter." "Let them try," Knox said quietly. When Oliver finally stumbled out, the silence persisted for several heartbeats before the room erupted in conversation. Lillian was vaguely aware of Margaret leading her to a chair, of someone pressing a glass into her trembling hands. "Drink," Knox instructed, suddenly beside her. "It'll steady you," Lillian obeyed, wincing as the whiskey burned down her throat. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He's right about the law." "The law doesn't always align with what's right," Knox replied, crouching to meet her gaze. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Not this time." Something dark flickered in his eyes. "This time," he repeated softly. "How long were you with him?" 7 years, Lillian admitted. "Since I was 17, Knox's jaw tightened. "And how long was he, from the beginning?" she interrupted, unwilling to hear the words spoken aloud. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters," Knox insisted. "And he won't stop. Men like that never do." Margaret, who had been hovering nearby, cleared her throat. "I may have spoken hastily earlier." "You're welcome to stay, Lillian, but—" She hesitated, glancing at the other patrons. "There might be talk. People in this town have certain Expectations about marriage. They'll call you unholy for leaving your husband, Knox said bluntly. This territory isn't kind to women who defy their vows, no matter the reason. Lillian's gaze dropped to her hands. Then perhaps I should move on. Or perhaps, Knox suggested, you should stay exactly where you are and let them talk. He stood, adjusting his hat. I've got a proposition for you, Mrs. Forester. Meet me tomorrow at noon if you're interested. Before she could ask what he meant, Knox strode out of the saloon, leaving Lillian to wonder what possible proposition a ranch foreman could offer a runaway wife. Sleep eluded Lillian that night. She sat by her window, watching the street below for any sign of Oliver returning. By dawn, her eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but her decision was made. She would meet Knox O'Malley and hear his proposition. Whatever it was, it couldn't be worse than returning to Oliver or fleeing into the wilderness alone. At precisely noon, Lillian found Knox waiting outside the Silver Spur, mounted on a magnificent black stallion and leading a chestnut mare. "You came," he observed, offering a hand to help her mount the second horse. "I wasn't certain you would." "I've run out of options," Lillian replied honestly, gathering the reins. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk privately," Knox said, turning his horse toward the outskirts of town. "Do you ride?" "My father taught me," she answered, settling comfortably in the saddle. "Before I was married." They rode in companionable silence, leaving Cody behind. The Montana landscape opened before them, vast plains stretching toward distant mountains, the sky an endless blue canvas overhead. After nearly an hour, Knox guided them to a small creek shaded by cottonwoods. He dismounted and helped Lillian down, his hands strong but gentle on her waist. "This is Triple Crown land," he explained, gesturing to the surrounding countryside. 20,000 acres of the finest grazing in the territory. Lillian looked around, admiring the beauty of the place. "It's magnificent. It's home," Knox replied simply. He reached into his saddlebag and retrieved a cloth-wrapped package. "I thought you might be hungry." Inside was bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. They sat on the creek bank, the horses grazing nearby, and shared the simple meal. "Your husband will be back," Knox said finally, getting to the heart of the matter. "And when he returns, he'll either drag you away or make life impossible for you here. People in town are already talking," Lillian sighed. "I know." "There's a solution," Knox continued, his voice carefully neutral. "One that would protect you legally and silence the gossips." Lillian stiffened. "Mr. O'Malley, if you're suggesting marriage," he interrupted. "To me." Her mouth fell open in shock. You can't possibly, we barely know each other." "I know enough," Knox replied steadily. "I know you're brave enough to leave a man who hurt you. I know you work hard and cook like an angel. I know you deserve better than what life's handed you so far." He paused. "And I know I can offer you safety." "Why would you do this?" Lillian whispered. Knox looked away, his profile sharp against the landscape. "I have my reasons." "That's not an answer," he sighed. "The owner of Triple Crown is returning soon with his daughter. He wants the ranch running smoothly with all appearances of stability and respectability. A married foreman looks more reliable than a bachelor. So I would be convenient." The word tasted bitter. "Initially, perhaps," Knox admitted. "But I'm offering you a real home, Lillian, your own space, protection under my name. I won't," he cleared his throat. "I won't expect anything from you that you're not willing to give. A marriage in name only. For as long as you wish it to be." Lillian studied him, this enigmatic man who had already risked himself once to protect her. "Why me? There must be plenty of willing women in Cody." "None that need what I'm offering as badly as you do," Knox said simply. "And none that he stopped, recalibrating. "None that I respect as much." The honesty in his voice stirred something in Lillian's chest. "People will say you married a fallen woman." Knox's mouth curved slightly. "They called you unholy for leaving your husband. I'll be your sin." The quiet declaration hung between them, laden with possibilities Lillian scarcely dared consider. This man, this stranger, offering sanctuary when the world had turned its back. It was madness to accept, madness to trust another man so soon after escaping Oliver's clutches. "I need time to think," she said finally. Knox nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "The offer stands until tomorrow. After that, I'll need to make other arrangements before the owner arrives." "How long have you been planning this?" Lillian asked suddenly. "Planning, I haven't been," Knox admitted. "But I've been watching you these past weeks. You remind me of someone I once knew." A shadow passed across his face, someone who didn't get away in time. The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. As they reached the Silver Spur, Knox helped her dismount. "Tomorrow," he said, his hand lingering briefly on hers. "I'll be here at noon." Lillian spent the night weighing her options, which were painfully few. She could flee to another town, but without references or connections, she would face the same suspicions and limitations. She could return to Oliver and pray she survived his rage. Or she could marry a virtual stranger who promised protection but whose motives remained partially obscured. By morning, her decision was made. Knox was waiting as promised, his expression giving nothing away as she approached. They stood facing each other in the dusty street, watched by curious onlookers. "Yes," Lillian said simply. "I accept your offer." Relief flashed briefly across Knox's face before his composure returned. "We'll need to do this properly. Judge Wilson can perform the ceremony this afternoon." "So soon?" "Your husband could return any day," Knox pointed out. "Better to establish our claim before he does." 3 hours later, Lillian stood beside Knox in Judge Wilson's office, speaking vows she had once believed would bind her only once in life. She wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that Margaret had helped her mend. Knox had procured a simple gold band that felt strangely light compared to Oliver's heavy silver ring, which she'd left behind. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Judge Wilson declared, looking somewhat perplexed at the hasty union between the ranch foreman and the saloon cook. "You may kiss your bride." Lillian tensed, but Knox merely brushed his lips against her cheek, a feather-light touch that was gone almost before she felt it. His respect for her boundaries both relieved and puzzled her. "Mrs. O'Malley," he said formally, offering his arm. "Shall we?" The name sounded foreign to her ears. Mrs. O'Malley. No longer Forester, no longer Whitman. A new identity forged in desperation and pragmatism. Knox had a wagon waiting, already loaded with Lillian's meager possessions. "I thought we'd head straight to the ranch," he explained. "Unless you'd prefer to stay in town tonight." "No," Lillian decided. "Let's go home." The word felt strange on her tongue, but Knox's slight smile in response made something warm unfurl in her chest. Triple Crown Ranch was more impressive than Lillian had imagined. The main house was sturdy and well-built, with a wide porch and tall windows. Several outbuildings, a bunkhouse, and corrals completed the central compound, all nestled in a valley with a creek running along one side. "The owner's house is there," Knox pointed to the main structure. "Our quarters are attached at the back, separate entrance but connected to the main house for winter convenience." "Our quarters." Lillian swallowed hard at the implication. As if reading her thoughts, Knox added, "There are 2 bedrooms. You'll have your privacy." He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside. The foreman's quarters were simple but comfortable, a small parlor, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms opening off the main space. Everything was scrupulously clean, if somewhat sparse in decoration. "This will be your room," Knox said, setting her trunk down in the larger of the two bedrooms. "Mine's across the way. Kitchen's stocked, but I usually take meals with the hands in the bunkhouse." He hesitated. "You're welcome to join us or cook for yourself, whatever you prefer." "When does the owner arrive?" Lillian asked, trying to orient herself to this new reality. 2 weeks. That should give us time to." He trailed off, seemingly unsure how to finish the thought. "To what?" Lillian prompted. "To establish our story," Knox replied. "People will have questions. We should agree on what to tell them." They settled in the small parlor, an awkward distance between them on the sofa. "How did we meet?" Lillian began. "The truth is simplest," Knox suggested. "I saw you in town, we became acquainted and decided to marry. And our courtship—" "Brief but sincere," Knox said with the ghost of a smile. "We're both decisive people who recognized a good match." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "And if they ask why I left my first husband," Knox's expression hardened, "that's no one's business but yours. If pressed, we say only that the marriage was dissolved." "It wasn't, though," Lillian pointed out. "Legally, I'm still married to Oliver." "Not in this territory," Knox corrected her. "Abandonment for over 3 months is grounds for dissolution. You've been gone nearly a month already. By the time anyone might challenge us, it will be moot." The thoroughness of his planning impressed and slightly alarmed her. "You've given this considerable thought." "I don't enter into commitments lightly, Lillian." His gaze was steady. "Neither the legal ones nor the moral ones." "And which is our marriage?" she asked softly. "Legal or moral?" "Both," he answered without hesitation. "I've sworn to protect you, and I will, from your former husband, from gossip, from hardship if I can." He paused. "The rest, that's for you to decide in your own time." That night, alone in her new bedroom, Lillian marveled at the strange turn her life had taken. 1 month ago, she'd been enduring Oliver's brutality with no end in sight. Now she was the wife of a man she barely knew, living on one of the territory's largest ranches, wondering if she'd leapt from one form of captivity into another. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, she realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the sound of footsteps approaching her door. The following weeks established a cautious routine. Knox rose before dawn each day to work with his men, returning briefly at midday. Lillian focused on making the quarters more homelike, sewing curtains from fabric Knox had purchased and preparing meals that she left warming for his return. They ate dinner together most evenings, their conversations gradually becoming less stilted as they discovered common interests in books and music. Knox proved to be an educated man despite his cowboy exterior. He read voraciously and could discuss everything from Shakespeare to the latest scientific discoveries. When Lillian expressed surprise at his knowledge, he merely shrugged. "Life takes unexpected turns," he said. "I wasn't always a rancher." "What were you before?" she asked, genuinely curious. A shadow crossed his face. Someone different, someone who failed when it mattered most. He wouldn't elaborate, and Lillian didn't press. They each had secrets, parts of themselves not yet ready for sharing. Instead, she told him about her childhood in Missouri, her father's small farm, her mother's death from influenza when Lillian was 15. "How did you end up with Whitman?" Knox asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Lillian stared into her tea. "My father died when I was 17. Oliver was the bank manager handling the estate. He was 30, established, respected in the community. He offered marriage as a solution to my predicament, a young woman alone with debts and no family." She laughed bitterly. "I thought he was being kind." Knox's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "When did it change?" "On our wedding night," she whispered. "He said he needed to teach me my place from the beginning. I thought, I thought it was just that once that I'd done something wrong, but it never stopped. Did you try to leave before? Once, after the first year. He found me at my friend's home and dragged me back. The beating was so severe I couldn't leave the house for weeks. Lillian shuddered at the memory. After that, he made sure I had no friends, no money, nowhere to go. Knox was silent for a long moment. What finally gave you the courage to run? Lillian's hand instinctively went to her stomach. I discovered I was expecting a child. I lost it after he pushed me down the stairs. That's when I knew I had to leave or die trying. The confession hung in the air between them. Knox set down his cup and tentatively reached for her hand. His calloused fingers enveloped hers, warm and steady. "He will never touch you again," Knox promised, his voice low and fierce. "Not while I draw breath." Lillian looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw something that made her breath catch, not pity, but understanding. Deep, personal understanding of the kind that comes only from similar pain. "Who did you lose?" she asked softly. Knox withdrew his hand, his face closing like a shutter against the light. "My sister," he finally answered. "Her husband was like your Oliver. By the time I discovered what was happening, it was too late." "I'm sorry," Lillian whispered. "So am I," Knox replied, rising abruptly. "Every day." He retreated inside, leaving Lillian to wonder about the ghosts that haunted her new husband and how they shaped the man he had become. The arrival of Gregory Harrington, owner of Triple Crown Ranch, and his daughter Celeste brought new tension to the ranch. Harrington was a Boston businessman who had purchased the property as an investment and rarely visited. At 50, he was robust and commanding, with the confident air of a man accustomed to having his orders followed without question. Celeste Harrington was 22, pretty in a polished way that made Lillian acutely aware of her own simple appearance. The young woman regarded Lillian with undisguised curiosity during their introduction. "Father never mentioned that Knox had married," Celeste said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "How? Unexpected." "It was rather sudden," Lillian admitted, conscious of Knox's steady presence beside her. "The best decisions often are," Knox added, his hand resting lightly at the small of Lillian's back. The gesture appeared casual, but Lillian understood its purpose, a visual confirmation of their union for Celeste's benefit. "Well, I'm sure we'll have ample opportunity to become acquainted," Celeste said, her gaze lingering on Knox. "Father intends for us to stay through the summer at least." That evening, as they prepared for a formal dinner with the Harringtons, Knox seemed preoccupied. "Is something troubling you?" Lillian asked, fastening the buttons of her best dress, a dark green cotton that Margaret had helped her alter to current fashion. Knox adjusted his string tie, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire. "Gregory Harrington has certain expectations. He hired me 5 years ago when this place was barely functioning. I've built it into one of the most profitable ranches in the territory." "He should be grateful," Lillian observed. "Perhaps, but he's also ambitious. Having his daughter here," Knox broke off, shaking his head. "It complicates things," understanding dawned. "He hoped you might become more than his foreman," Lillian guessed. "Perhaps his son-in-law." Knox's silence confirmed her suspicion. "Our marriage has disrupted his plans," she continued, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. "Will he dismiss you?" "No," Knox said firmly. "He needs me too much, but Celeste may make things difficult. She's accustomed to getting her way." Dinner proved Knox right. Celeste monopolized the conversation, frequently referencing shared memories with Knox from previous visits. Her behavior toward Lillian alternated between saccharine politeness and subtle dismissal. "Knox tells me you were a cook at a saloon," Celeste said as they ate. "How fascinating. I've always wondered what sort of women work in such establishments." "The sort who need employment, Miss Harrington," Lillian replied evenly. "Just like anyone else." Gregory Harrington chuckled. "Well said, Mrs. O'Malley. Though I must admit, I was surprised to learn of Knox's marriage. He's always seemed thoroughly dedicated to the ranch, almost monkishly so." "Some commitments enhance others rather than detract from them," Knox said, his voice calm but with an underlying firmness that silenced further comment. Later, as they prepared for bed in the privacy of their quarters, Lillian found herself wrestling with unexpected feelings of inadequacy. "Celeste clearly had expectations regarding you," she said, trying to keep her tone light. Knox sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Gregory has been hinting for years that a marriage between Celeste and me would be advantageous. I've never encouraged the idea." "She's beautiful," Lillian observed, "and wealthy. Most men would consider her an excellent match." "I'm not most men." Knox's gaze was steady. "And beauty comes in many forms, Lillian, not all of them as obvious as Celeste Harrington's." The compliment, subtle but sincere, warmed her unexpectedly. "Thank you for defending me at dinner." "You're my wife," Knox said simply. "In the eyes of the law and everyone on this ranch, that deserves respect." The words "my wife" sent a curious flutter through Lillian's chest. They had maintained their separate bedrooms as agreed, their physical contact limited to the occasional necessary touch or public display for appearances. Yet something was changing between them, a gradual softening, a growing awareness that neither had anticipated. As Lillian retired to her room that night, she found herself wondering what it might be like to truly be Knox O'Malley's wife in every sense of the word. The thought both frightened and intrigued her. The Harringtons' presence transformed the rhythm of ranch life. Gregory spent his days with Knox, assessing operations and discussing business matters. Celeste, meanwhile, seemed determined to insert herself into every aspect of Lillian's daily routine. "I thought I might help you with the garden today," Celeste announced one morning, appearing at Lillian's door in an impractical but fashionable dress. "Knox mentioned you're planting vegetables." Lillian hesitated, then nodded. "I would welcome the company." They worked side by side in the small plot Knox had cleared for her. Celeste's expensive gloves quickly soiled as she half-heartedly turned soil. "You must find life here terribly primitive after the comforts of Boston," Lillian commented, trying to bridge the awkward silence. "It has its rustic charm," Celeste replied, "though I confess I'm more interested in the people than the place." She paused, examining a tomato seedling. "Knox, for instance, he's quite remarkable, isn't he?" "Yes," Lillian agreed cautiously. "He's a good man." "And handsome," Celeste added, watching Lillian's reaction. "In that rugged, untamed way that's so different from Eastern gentlemen, I've always found him compelling." Lillian focused on her planting. "You've known him long." 5 years, Celeste smiled, clearly pleased to have information Lillian lacked. "We've had some wonderful conversations during my visits. Knox is surprisingly well-read for a man in his position." "His position?" Lillian echoed, bristling slightly at the condescension in Celeste's tone. "A ranch foreman," Celeste clarified. "Though Father always said Knox was destined for greater things, with the right connections, of course." She sighed dramatically. "I had such hopes when Father announced this trip, then we arrived to find Knox married." Her gaze sharpened. "Rather suddenly, from what I understand." "We didn't see the need for a lengthy courtship," Lillian said carefully. "Evidently not," Celeste murmured. "One does wonder about such hasty arrangements, especially when they involve a woman with your background." Lillian stiffened. "My background?" Word travels, Mrs. O'Malley, even to Boston. Father has business associates in this territory who keep him informed. They mentioned a disturbance at the Silver Spur involving a woman whose husband came to reclaim her." Celeste's smile was all feline satisfaction. Shortly after which, that same woman married Knox O'Malley. Cold dread washed over Lillian. "What exactly are you implying, Miss Harrington?" "Nothing at all," Celeste replied innocently. "I simply find the timing curious, almost as if the marriage were one of convenience rather than affection." "You know nothing about my relationship with Knox," Lillian said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Perhaps not," Celeste conceded, rising and brushing dirt from her skirts. "But I do know Knox, and the Knox O'Malley I know would never marry impulsively for love. He's far too calculated for that." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Which makes me wonder what other reason he might have had." With that parting shot, Celeste strolled away, leaving Lillian kneeling in the dirt with her heart pounding in her ears. That evening, Lillian confronted Knox as he returned from the day's work. "Celeste knows about Oliver," she said without preamble, "and she's questioning why we married so suddenly." Knox's expression darkened. "What did she say to you?" Lillian relayed their conversation. "She all but called me a bigamist," she concluded bitterly, "and suggested you married me for some ulterior motive." Knox paced the small parlor, his usual composure fractured. "I should have anticipated this. Gregory has associates everywhere, including Cody." "What will we do?" Lillian asked. "If the Harringtons decide to make this public—" "They won't," Knox interrupted. "At least, Gregory won't. It would reflect poorly on his judgment to have hired a foreman who's involved in a scandal." He ran a hand through his hair. "Celeste, however, might act independently if she thinks she can drive a wedge between us." "Why would she want to? Surely she can see our marriage is—" Lillian stopped, unsure how to characterize their arrangement. "Is what?" Knox prompted, his eyes intent on her face. "Is not what she thinks," Lillian finished lamely. Knox moved closer, close enough that Lillian could smell the leather and sage scent of him. "What does she think, Lillian?" "That it's a marriage of convenience," Lillian whispered, "without affection." "And is that what you think?" His voice had dropped to a near whisper. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't know any more." For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flashed in Knox's eyes. Then a knock at the door shattered the moment. Gregory Harrington stood outside, his expression grave. "Knox, I need to speak with you privately." Knox glanced at Lillian. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my wife." Gregory's mouth tightened. "Very well. I've received some troubling information about Mrs. O'Malley's past. Information that, if true, could cause significant difficulties for all of us." "If you're referring to her previous marriage," Knox said evenly, "I'm fully aware of the situation. Are you aware that abandoning one's husband is not just frowned upon socially, but potentially criminal?" Gregory pressed. "That harboring such a woman could be seen as abetting desertion." Lillian paled. "Mr. Harrington, you don't understand. I understand that my foreman has placed himself, and by extension my ranch, in a precarious position." Gregory interrupted. "Knox, I value your work here, but this situation requires immediate resolution." He fixed Knox with a stern look. "The woman must return to her legal husband, or you must seek employment elsewhere." Knox's expression hardened. "With all due respect, sir, I won't be separating from my wife." "If that means my position here is terminated, so be it." "Don't be hasty," Gregory cautioned. "Consider carefully. You've spent 5 years building this operation. Would you throw that away for a woman you barely know? A woman who has already proven herself willing to break sacred vows?" "Those vows were broken long before Lillian left," Knox replied, his voice dangerously quiet. "And I know everything I need to about the kind of courage it took for her to escape." Gregory shook his head. "I've always respected your judgment, Knox. But in this matter, I believe you're allowing sentiment to cloud your reason." "On the contrary," Knox said, "I've never been more clear-headed." He straightened, his decision evident in his posture. "We'll be gone by morning." After Gregory departed, Lillian stared at Knox in disbelief. "You're giving up everything for me. Your position, your home, they're just things, Lillian," Knox said simply. "Replaceable, you are not." "But where will we go?" Knox considered for a moment. "I have savings. Enough to buy a small spread north of here, near the Canadian border. It's wilder country, less settled, but good land. And if Oliver comes looking, let him try," Knox said grimly. "The territory is vast, and I have friends who'll help us disappear if necessary." He hesitated. Unless you'd rather we go our separate ways." "I would understand if—" "No," Lillian interrupted, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. "No, I want to stay with you." Something like relief crossed Knox's features. "Then we'll leave at first light, pack only what's essential." As they prepared to depart their home, Lillian was struck by how little they truly needed to take. Clothing, a few books, Knox's rifles, her mother's hairbrush, the physical inventory of their life together barely filled 2 trunks. Knox had arranged for a wagon and team, plus 2 saddle horses. They loaded silently in the pre-dawn darkness, avoiding the main house where the Harringtons slept. "Ready?" Knox asked, helping Lillian onto the wagon seat. She nodded, casting one last glance at the place that had briefly been home. "Ready." They had just reached the main road when hoofbeats approached from behind. Knox's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, then relaxed as he recognized Hank, his most trusted ranch hand. "Thought you might slip away without saying goodbye," Hank said, drawing alongside them. "The boys and I wanted you to have this." He handed Knox an envelope. "It ain't much, but it might help with the new place." Knox opened the envelope to find cash, a substantial amount gathered from the ranch hand's own wages. "Hank, we can't accept this." "Sure you can," Hank insisted. "You've always treated us fair, paid us good, stood by us in hard times. This is us standing by you." His weathered face creased in a smile. "Besides, we all like Mrs. O'Malley a sight better than Miss Harrington. Woman makes the best apple pie in the territory." Lillian felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Hank. Please thank everyone for us." "Where you headed?" Hank asked. Knox shook his head. "Better you don't know, old friend. If anyone comes asking, I ain't seen you, don't know nothing," Hank finished with a wink. "Good luck to you both." He tipped his hat and wheeled his horse around, disappearing back toward the ranch. They traveled for 2 weeks, moving steadily northward through increasingly rugged country. The journey was arduous but strangely freeing. Each night they camped under the vast Montana sky, talking more openly than they had in their proper quarters at Triple Crown. Lillian learned that Knox had been born in Pennsylvania to a prosperous family, educated at Harvard, and destined for a legal career before a family tragedy altered his course. He'd come west seeking both escape and redemption, finding purpose in the demanding physical work of ranching. In turn, she shared more about her life with Oliver, the gradual erosion of her spirit, the survival strategies she'd developed, the dreams she'd kept alive even in her darkest moments. "I used to imagine running away," she admitted one night as they sat beside their campfire. "But I never had the courage until that final night when I realized he would eventually kill me. Even then, I was terrified." "Yet you did it anyway," Knox observed. "That's the definition of courage, Lillian, not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it." She studied his face in the firelight, this man who had risked everything for her. "Why did you really marry me, Knox? The truth." Knox was silent for a long moment. "When I saw you sitting outside that store in Cody, something about you reminded me of Sarah, my sister. The same look in your eyes, a mixture of desperation and determination." He poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "I failed Sarah. I wasn't there when she needed me most. I didn't want to fail you too." "So it was guilt," Lillian said softly, trying to ignore the disappointment that settled in her chest. "At first, perhaps," Knox acknowledged. "But then I got to know you, your strength, your kindness, despite everything you'd endured." He met her gaze across the flames. "I married you to give you protection, Lillian. But I stayed married to you because I began to care for you in ways I hadn't anticipated." The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch they'd shared. Lillian felt her breath catch in her throat. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what? Of trusting again. Of believing this is real." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Oliver was charming once too, before we were married." "I'm not asking you to trust blindly," Knox said gently. "Only to give us both the chance to discover what this could be in our own time." He stood, moving around the fire to sit beside her. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand, palm up. "No promises except one. I will never hurt you, Lillian, not ever." She placed her hand in his, the simple gesture a leap of faith that made her heart race. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and reassuring. That night, for the first time, they slept side by side beneath the stars, not as husband and wife in the physical sense, but as two people gradually lowering the barriers between them. 3 days later, they reached their destination, a small valley nestled between pine-covered hills, with a clear stream running through its center. A weathered cabin stood near a cluster of aspen trees, abandoned but structurally sound. "It's not much," Knox said as they surveyed the property. "The previous owner died last winter. His heirs are in St. Louis and willing to sell cheap. 160 acres, water rights included." "It's perfect," Lillian breathed, taking in the wild beauty of the place. "It feels like we could start fresh here." "That's the idea," Knox smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn features. "No one for miles knows your past or mine. We're just Mr. and Mrs. O'Malley, homesteaders trying to make a living." The work of establishing their new home was exhausting but satisfying. They repaired the cabin roof, cleared the overgrown garden, and built corrals for the horses. Knox purchased a small herd of cattle and 2 milk cows from a neighboring rancher 30 miles away. Lillian planted vegetables and herbs, established a flock of chickens, and created a home from the simple cabin. As summer ripened into autumn, their relationship continued its gradual evolution. The easy companionship of their journey deepened into something more complex, charged with an awareness neither could ignore. Physical boundaries remained, but emotional ones dissolved as they learned to trust each other with their thoughts, fears, and hopes. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Lillian confessed one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. "But I do, here with you." Knox reached for her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I'm glad." "I keep waiting for something to shatter this peace," she admitted. "For Oliver to find us, or for you to realize you've made a terrible mistake." "Not a mistake," Knox said firmly. "Never that." His eyes held hers, and Lillian felt the familiar flutter in her chest that his gaze increasingly evoked. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat, Knox leaned toward her. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle, questioning without demand. Lillian froze momentarily, old fears threatening to surface. Then something within her responded, a hunger for connection she'd thought permanently extinguished. Her hands moved to Knox's shoulders as she returned the kiss, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. When they finally separated, both were breathing unsteadily. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Knox admitted, his voice rough. "But I needed you to be ready, to be certain." "I'm not certain of anything," Lillian whispered. "Except that I want to try with you." That night, for the first time, Lillian invited Knox into her bedroom. Their lovemaking was unlike anything she had experienced, patient, tender, focused on her pleasure as much as his own. Knox treated her body with reverence, healing old wounds with each careful touch, each whispered endearment. Afterward, lying in his arms, Lillian realized she was crying. "Did I hurt you?" Knox asked immediately, his face creased with concern. "No," she assured him, touching his cheek. "I'm crying because I didn't know it could be like this, that it could feel like a gift rather than a duty or a punishment." Knox kissed her forehead. "It should always have been a gift for you, Lillian. Always." They settled into a new rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Their days were filled with the honest labor of preparing for the harsh Montana cold, preserving food, chopping firewood, insulating the cabin. Their nights were a discovery of each other, building a physical intimacy that matched the emotional one they'd been cultivating for months. For the first time in her adult life, Lillian felt fully herself, not a possession or a victim, but a partner, valued and respected. The girl who had married Oliver at 17 seemed like a stranger, someone from another lifetime. The first snow fell in early November, transforming their valley into a pristine wonderland. They celebrated by building a fire in the hearth, cooking a special dinner, and opening a bottle of wine Knox had been saving for a significant occasion. "To our first winter together," Knox toasted, raising his glass. "The first of many," Lillian added, the words both a wish and a promise. After dinner, Knox seemed unusually pensive. "I have something for you," he said finally, retrieving a small package from his coat pocket. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Lillian opened it, she found a tiny photograph of herself and Knox, taken in Cody by a traveling photographer the day after their wedding. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touched by the sentiment. "There's something else," Knox said, his expression serious. "Something I've been meaning to tell you." He took her hands in his. "I received a letter last week from the circuit judge. Your divorce from Oliver has been finalized on grounds of abandonment and cruelty." Lillian stared at him in shock. "How? When did you—" "I started the proceedings before we left Triple Crown," Knox explained. "I didn't want to give you false hope, so I said nothing until it was certain." He squeezed her hands gently. "You're free, Lillian, legally and completely free of him." The enormity of it washed over her in waves: relief, disbelief, and finally, a soaring joy. "I'm free," she repeated, testing the words. "Which means," Knox continued, his voice dropping to match the intimacy of the moment, "that our marriage exists only because we choose it. Not from necessity or protection, but because it's what we want." Lillian felt tears gather in her eyes. "Is it what you want, Knox? Truly, more than anything," he answered without hesitation. "I love you, Lillian. I think I began falling in love with you that first day in Cody, though I was too stubborn to recognize it." He brushed a tear from her cheek. "The question is, what do you want, you?" she said simply. "This life we're building, us." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "I love you too, Knox O'Malley, with everything I am." Their kiss sealed the declaration, a promise more binding than any legal document or ceremony. Winter deepened, wrapping their small homestead in a blanket of white. The isolation might have been daunting, but for Lillian and Knox, it was a gift: uninterrupted time to strengthen their bond, to plan their future, to heal old wounds. They read aloud by lamplight in the evenings, discussed books and ideas, shared stories from their lives before they met. Lillian learned to shoot, determined never again to be defenseless. Knox discovered a talent for carving, creating small wooden animals that began to populate their cabin's shelves. In January, Lillian realized she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and anxiety, memories of her lost baby casting shadows over her happiness. "This time will be different," Knox assured her, holding her close. "You're strong and healthy, and we'll take every precaution." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Lillian found herself contemplating the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. From the desperate woman fleeing an abusive husband to a beloved wife, creating a family with a man who cherished her. "What shall we name the baby?" Knox asked one evening, his hand resting on her rounded belly. "Sarah, if it's a girl," Lillian suggested softly, "after your sister." Knox's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "She would have liked that, and if it's a boy, James," Lillian decided, "after my father." The baby arrived during the first thaw of spring, a healthy boy with Knox's gray eyes and Lillian's determined chin. James Thomas O'Malley entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin, a sound of new beginnings and hope. As Lillian held her son in the bed Knox had made for them, with wildflowers he'd gathered on the nightstand beside her, she felt a completion she had never imagined possible. "He's perfect," Knox whispered, perched beside them, his finger caught in his son's tiny but surprisingly strong grip. "He is," Lillian agreed, marveling at the miracle they'd created. "And so is this, all of it." Knox leaned down to kiss her gently. Not bad for a woman they called unholy and a man who volunteered to be her sin. Lillian laughed softly. "I think we've proven them wrong, don't you?" "Thoroughly," Knox agreed with a smile. "And we'll keep proving them wrong every day for the rest of our lives." As the years passed, their homestead flourished into a prosperous small ranch. 2 more children joined their family, twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, born 3 years after James. The cabin expanded to accommodate their growing household, with Knox adding rooms as needed. Occasionally, news reached them from their former lives. Gregory Harrington had sold Triple Crown Ranch after his daughter married an Eastern businessman. Oliver Whitman had left Montana Territory, reportedly heading to California after losing his position at the bank. These echoes from the past held no power over their present happiness. In town, they were known simply as the O'Malleys, hardworking, honest folk who kept to themselves but were generous with neighbors in need. Few knew their full history, and those who did kept the knowledge to themselves, recognizing the rare and precious thing the couple had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Knox surprised Lillian with a party, inviting the scattered neighbors from miles around. As fiddle music filled the autumn air and children played in the yard, Knox pulled his wife aside, leading her to the spot where they'd shared their first true kiss. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Lillian looked around at the home they'd created, the thriving garden, the healthy livestock, the children laughing with friends, the weathered cabin that had sheltered their love through a decade of seasons. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully, reaching up to touch the silver strands beginning to appear at Knox's temples. "And you, any regrets?" "Only that I didn't find you sooner," Knox replied. "Think of all the time we missed." "I prefer to think of all the time we have," Lillian countered. "And all we've made of it." Knox smiled, the expression still capable of quickening her pulse after all these years. "Mrs. O'Malley, would you care to dance with your husband?" "I thought you'd never ask, Mr. O'Malley," she replied, taking his outstretched hand. As they rejoined the celebration, moving together in perfect harmony to the music, Lillian reflected that sometimes life's harshest storms lead to the most unexpected blessings. She had fled into darkness, desperate and alone, only to find her way to this, a love that had transformed 2 wounded souls into something stronger, brighter, and infinitely more beautiful than either could have become alone. They had defied convention, risked judgment, and built their life on their own terms. And in doing so, they had discovered that true holiness had nothing to do with society's rigid expectations, and everything to do with the sacred bond between two hearts that choose each other, freely and completely, day after day after day.